Giant Steps, one of the most intimidating tunes in jazz history for most of us. And you know, most of the difficulty comes from trying to keep up with every single chord in the harmony, and that can be almost too much for anyone, especially when it's going by at a blazing fast tempo. So if you've been avoiding this tune altogether because you don't think you're ready, or when you look at the chart, you're convinced it's way over your level, stick around for the ideas presented in this video. It'll allow you to get started and take playing over this tune as far as you want after you incorporate these ideas. Now, in my own personal story, when I first attempted to learn this tune, I practiced all the accepted patterns, 1, 2, 3, 5, and all the exercises, but when it came time to actually solo over this, I just kind of felt trapped. My lines sounded like jagged and kind of unmusical because I was so bound by the density of the harmony and trying to use it to make my statement instead of my innate sense of musicality and phrasing. Now, the first and by far the most important thing I did was to slow this tune down, and actually I changed the feel. And thanks to the wonderful Pat Metheny for teaching me this wasn't just acceptable, it actually sounds amazing. He did exactly this on his live album with his trio. And it gave me permission to sort of stop chasing speed and start chasing the things that were really important. So I started practicing Giant Steps as a medium tempo bossa. And that one little simple shift, it got my foot in the door. Suddenly I could breathe, I could phrase, I could actually hear what I was playing. If this tune is just simply too intimidating to even get started with, slow that tempo down and consider changing the feel. It works so beautifully as that medium tempo bossa or even a ballad. This tune sounds amazing as a ballad. Okay, so there's the first idea, but now I'm about to talk about what really changed everything for me. So as I was struggling through this tune, I had a realization that sort of changed everything. Every single chord in Giant Steps is diatonic to just 3 major tonalities, right? So when we think of the Coltrane cycle or Coltrane changes, at the end of the day, they're built on just 3 major keys, a third apart from each other. So in Giant Steps, it's B major, down a major third to G major, and down another major third to E flat major. Now, if we look at the full chord chart, again, we should realize something. All the chords, everything that you see is diatonic to those 3 major tonalities. So that meant I could reduce all those chords. So I went through and I wrote my own chart that looks far less intimidating. And automatically, just like with the tempo, it alleviated just so much stress, right? There's so much less to worry about. Now, I already knew my major scales and I knew my way around those 3 tonalities. So now I knew what I had to do. I should make sure that I can hear when those tonalities change and practice reflecting that in my playing. So what I started by doing was asking myself the question, could I play a nice sounding solo using just the diatonic notes of those 3 major tonalities, of those 3 major scales? Well, Well, you can be the judge on what you just heard, but it took me many, many courses, a ton of hours, a lot of practice. But eventually I got to the point where I could play something I thought sounded pretty cool using only diatonic notes from those three keys. And here's what made this so effective. Because I didn't have a bunch of chord symbols telling me exactly what to play and sort of distracting me, I had to use my ears to tell my fingers what notes would sound good and where they would sound good, right? So it turned into the chart sort of dictating what I was doing, the chords dictating what I was doing, and it turned into my ears and my musicality dictating what would sound good, because in the absence of information, all we're left with really is our ears and our sense of what sounds good. Now, again, I want to reiterate, I had to go through a lot of bad sounding solos to get to the point of sounding all right. But when I did start sounding good, it was all instinct. It was a really clear oral understanding of the harmony, not a cerebral one. My ears owned that tune, not my brain. So after a ton of practice using these key centers, which is what I think you should do if you're first getting started with this, I did allow myself to consider all of the changes again. But here's the thing, something had changed. I wasn't bound to every chord symbol, even though they were there, right? It wasn't out of necessity that I had to follow every chord change. Instead, I could use the chords to my advantage when they served what I wanted to play, or I could leave them behind because I knew that it was okay. It was okay to get rid of all of them. I could still sound good. So the chords, they weren't like my masters anymore. I could use them, not use them, and it was totally fine either way. So here's an example of me playing a couple choruses where I'm giving myself that option. If I do want to pay attention to all the chord symbols or use them to my advantage, I can, but I'm still coming from that place of not feeling the need to use all of them. Now, you may notice that when I give myself that option of thinking beyond just the key centers, a lot of times it does add color and specificity to my solo, and you might enjoy this one more than the first one. But the foundation is still just those three home keys, B, G, and E flat. And what I found was practicing in this way and building my skills in this way gave me a huge advantage. Because when I went out into the world and somebody called this tune at like a really fast tempo or something like that, I could just fall back into clearing the decks and thinking about that simple tonality-based improvisation that I'd practiced so much. And that was a lifesaver. Now I could actually like pay attention to what was going on around me. I could keep up with the time, actually listen to the band, the musicians I was playing with, and not be just like super stressed about nailing every chord. So that's my story. And I urge you to try this if this tune has always seemed unapproachable to you. And one thing I really, really need you to understand is that simplifying is not a substitute for the hours and hours of work, the hundreds, maybe thousands of choruses that you have to play over this, right? So no matter how you choose to approach the tune, it takes a ton of work and concentration to get good at this. It takes a lot of practice. This is not a tune that you could just learn over a weekend. Because even with just those three big tonalities, they're very disparate from each other, right? So you really do have to develop some skills. Now, it's also important to understand this was just my approach. And I do know a lot of other musicians that, they get the full chord chart, they don't get overwhelmed by it at all, and they could just approach it like that, and it works really, really well for them. This is simply for those people that think maybe there's a different way because I just can't think about all that stuff. Look forward to seeing you all in the comments section, and if you want to know more about how you can work with me and get your hands on some of my books and courses, become part of one of my jazz education groups online. There'll be a link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, you're definitely gonna enjoy this one that's on the screen right now. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.